Today we'll be looking into Roblox games that are once popular but have now died out. And stay tuned to the end to see if you remember any. Also please subscribe. Alright, firstly let's start with viral games, starting with Rainbow Friends. And I know what you're thinking, this game's not dead. But this game has died out significantly and is dying every day. Let me kind of break down what's going on. So firstly, this game has almost 3 billion visits now, but around like 10,000 people active, which obviously is still pretty good, but when you compare it to what it used to have, it's not as good anymore. Like the game used to average 80,000 players, every day, and it will constantly hold above that, but ever since then it's going constantly down. And the game will spike up if it updates, but then die down again. Like as we can see in the graph, it spiked up again for the update, but then ever since then it's just going down and down, losing players every day. So what's going on? Why did this game die? Well, the main thing being the lack of updates. The game has been out for a few years now, and they had so much hype with Chapter 1, but then they took like a whole year to release to Chapter 2. And ever since then, there's been no more updates and nothing major else to the game. And obviously the big major things that people want are new chapters because that adds the most content to the game. So without constant new chapters and the fact that there's so much wait in between chapters, a lot of people just got fed up and moved on. But here's the thing. The developer behind this game literally has a history of doing this, where they make viral games and not update them that often. For example, the person behind this also made the viral game Spider, which has almost 2 billion visits, and once again, in typical fashion, it doesn't update anymore. And also when the game was in its prime, it also didn't really update that much. That's why people kind of moved on from the game. But as we can see, this developer knows how to make viral games. And it doesn't end here, surprisingly. The same thing happened with Baker's Valley, a very huge game with over 150 million visits, and once again, I think the game was lacking updates for a little bit and the developer moved on eventually. And not only that, this person also made Redwood Prison, which is over 300 million visits in a classic game. And overall, as we can see, the developer knows how to make viral games. However, they don't tend to update that often. And that's not just a trend with Rainbow Friends. The developer has done this for all his other viral games. And it seems like every once in a while he makes a viral game, updates a little bit, and then moves on. And that's kind of like just what he does. Now it is possible that he moved on from Rainbow Friends as a whole, but I highly doubt that because the game, is huge. And unlike Spider, I know he moved on from a big game like that, but I feel like with Spider, he kind of hit a wall with stuff he can add, but with Rainbow Friends, he has more like freedom, so I feel like he didn't move on just yet. And Rainbow Friends will probably have a Chapter 3, but in like a long time. And as we can see, this developer just has a history of doing stuff like this. And with that being said, let's move to our next game being Mad City. 2.5 billion visits and around 2,000 to 3,000 people active. And once again, that's not bad, but for all these like viral games in this section, they all still have a couple people or like a decent amount of people playing, but since these games are so big, they are obviously not as much as they used to have. So anyways, when this game blew up, it's kind of rivaling Jailbreak, and at one point they were even doing better than Jailbreak because at one point in Jailbreak a lot of people were starting to leave the game because they thought it got repetitive, and then during that time a lot of people realized that Mad City was released, and then a lot of people left to go to Mad City since he had more stuff and the game felt more fresh. And this kind of started a war between Jailbreak and Mad City actually dominated for a little bit because they constantly updated, they gave people a fresh experience, and Jailbreak at this time was kind of struggling to catch up. And overall Mad City was thriving at this point, but over time, Jailbreak kept releasing bigger and bigger updates, so people switched back to that since the game was getting less repetitive. And then Mad City reached a point where they were struggling with updates. So since they stopped consistent updates, people kind of got bored of the game, moved on. And kind of the same thing happened with Jailbreak, where the game just felt repetitive and boring. Like for example, a lot of these games, the main thing you do is just rob things. And even if they add new robberies, you can just rob the same thing over and over again. And there's only so much times you can do that. And then also apparently with Mad City, some other stuff happened behind the scenes where like their scripter left, which made it hard for updates. And they kind of started lacking updates for a while. And they were no longer releasing consistent updates, so a lot of people moved on, and a lot of people switched back to like Jailbreak and stuff. So with the competition and lack of updates, a lot of people moved on from Mad City. And anyways, again to our next game being Islands, which is over 2 billion visits and around 200 to 300 people active. And with this game, I feel like what happened and the reason it died is that a lot of people just moved on once they reach like the end stage of the game. And once they feel like they reach that end stage of the game, they kind of feel like there's not much to do anymore. You kind of feel like you achieved everything. And then obviously the people come back for like new updates and stuff, but once you beat the updates, you're kind of in that save state again where you kind of did everything and you just move on. But also with that, they actually just announced they're discontinuing the game, so it's gonna be like no more updates. So now the people who have reached the end state of the game aren't gonna come back anymore because there's gonna be no more updates, and because of that, the game is slowly dying and a lot of people are leaving the game now. And with that, let's move to our next game being Funky Friday, which is over 1.6 billion visits and around 2,000 to 4,000 people active. And this game was a copy of popular game Friday Funkin'. So when that game was in its prime, a lot of people turned to play the Roblox version as well, and it kind of fed off the success of that game as well. But then eventually over time, both these games started dying out, probably due to the repetitive nature of them and them getting boring over time. But also with Funky Friday, since it's a copy of Friday Night Funkin', they actually ran into problems using like the music in the game, and a lot of people use Funky Friday as like instead of playing the actual game. And since it had the original music and stuff, you know, like that's why the game was doing very well. But since he ran into issues with the music and stuff, a lot of people started leaving the game. Now with that, I think they did get a license to like use some of the assets and stuff still, but that kind of stole the momentum of the game. A lot of people left because of it. But also with that, they did say that they want to kind of move on to their own game, and they don't want to just be known as like a copy of that game, so they want to do their own stuff. That's why they removed the music as well. But because of that, and I guess the repetitive nature and how it got boring over time, a lot of people left the game, and the majority of people used it as just like another way of playing Friday Funkin'. And since that's not possible anymore, a lot of people just moved on and the game died out over time. And anyways, with that said, let's move to our next section, being story games, starting with Route 66. And this one's a bit different. The game has 7 million visits, but like 0 people active. And obviously 7 million visits is a lot, but compared to other games on this list, it's not that much. However, this game was very, very popular on YouTube though. Flamingo made a video on it, which has almost 10 million views, but here's the thing. When a lot of people watch story game videos, they've already experienced the entire story through videos and people like Flamingo, so they have no reason to go play the game themselves. And then if people do go play the games themselves, there's only so much time they can play it. Like once they experience a story for themselves, they probably just move on to other games. But with that, let's move to Daycare, which is over 450 million visits and around 700 to 1,000 people active. And overall, the same thing kind of applies here. You know, people play the story, they experience it for themselves or through YouTubers, and once they do that, the game doesn't have much replayability. Like you experience the story, you know what's going to happen, and you can only do that so much times before you move on. However, they did actually release Daycare 2, which also did very good. It says at 400 million visits and around like 1,000 people active. And once again, the same thing applies to that, but it kind of shows how big the game was. And overall, a lot of people seem to have just completed the story and moved on. And with that, let's get into Riding Hood Story, which has 50 to 100 people active and around like 35 million visits. And once again, all the points apply to this game as well, and almost every story game. You know, people play the story, experience the story, they know what's going to happen, so they move into other games and other story games. And that's not a bad thing. Like the whole point of a story game is to convey a story. And all these games achieve that. You know, it's kind of like reading a book. If it's really good, you might read it like again and whatever, but you don't just keep reading it over and over again. And it's the same thing with these games. If you experience a story, you know what's going to happen, and then you move on to other story games probably. And that's kind of the cycle of story games. That's why they don't have much replayability and they kind of die out over time. And with that, let's get into our next section, being simulators, starting with Vehicle Simulator, which has 666 million visits, but around 50 to 100 people active. And this game died for a few reasons. So from what I've seen, at the start of the game, they're releasing like super realistic version of cars, and they were very good recreations. However, over time, a lot of people started to realize that the cars were not being as accurate anymore, and they weren't as realistic. And a lot of people play these games, you know, to try to drive realistic looking cars and accurate cars of like the real life version. So a lot of people were disappointed when they kind of had this shift. But to be fair, a lot of car games are actually getting sued by companies, so they probably made this switch to try to avoid a lawsuit. However, it did make a lot of players leave the game because that's not what they expected and wanted from the game. And also the game does update stuff, and it did update kind of constantly, but the updates, from what I've seen, was disappointing for a lot of people. Like I saw this one here, for example, where a lot of people said that like the new map update was so hyped up, but it ended up being just a similar map. And overall, due to a bunch of situations and stuff, the game adopted a lot of hackers and exploiters, which kind of ruined the experience for a lot of people. And obviously the biggest thing, and the elephant in the room, being that the developer behind the game did do some insane actions recently, and he's been kind of on this downward spiral, but I'm not going to go too deep into that today. And with that, let's move to Lanky Box Simulator. And yes, this was a real game. It has over 20 million visits, and no one's really active anymore. And that's probably because the game is fully broken. I tried playing it and I got stuck in loading. I even bought a private server to make sure, and I can't get past the loading screen. And it seems like, you know, I think overall this game was just a cash grab, let's be real. Lanky Box seemed to launch this game when like simulators were super hype, and they probably thought that they can make like a quick bag off it, and that's exactly what seemed to happen. They weren't really passionate about the game, so they don't really update it anymore. And obviously you can tell they don't care about the game since it's literally broken right now. And overall, I don't even think the game is anything that special. It's just like an average simulator game that they definitely just made to get some money on the side. And it shows that they don't care about the game, like I said, because it's literally unplayable. So even if people want to play the game, they can't, because Lanky Box doesn't care about the game. And that's probably why it died out. The developers don't care about the game, people can't play the game, and it's just here for like a quick cash grab probably. But with that being said, let's move to our next game, being Anime Fighting Simulator X. And this was actually a sequel to a popular game called Anime Fighting Simulator, and it blew up because of that. And the game's over 75 million visits, but like 1,000 people active, which isn't bad, but not as much as it used to have. And when the game first launched, it was updating constantly, but as time went on, they adopted a history of constantly delaying stuff. So they would like constantly update, and then one day one update got delayed and everyone's like, oh, it's just one delay, it's fine. But then ever since that, they've been constantly delaying updates and stuff, which got a lot of people frustrated and losing interest for the game. And because of that, and like a lack of updates and delaying updates, a lot of people got bored and moved on. And with that, let's move to our last category of other games that I couldn't really fit into a category. Starting with Super Bomb Survival, which had almost 200 million visits but around 240 people active. And for this one, it seems like people just got bored over time. Like, the concept is a bit repetitive, and once you've played all the maps over and over again, it might just start to feel boring and repetitive. Like, all the new maps and stuff do kind of probably help make everything fresh, but the overall mechanic and stuff seems to be the same, and because of that, a lot of people probably just moved on over time because they feel like they probably did it all. And with that, let's move to our next game being Nicos Nexbots, where we can probably apply the same things. The game has 460 million visits, but around 1 to 2,000 people active. And when the game blew up, it was huge, and it was like a huge trend, but eventually people moved on. And like I said, probably due to people getting bored of the concept and it feeling repetitive. However, another factor you have to take into account, not for just this game, but basically every Roblox game, is that when this game was blowing up, it had a large presence on YouTube. You know, every YouTuber was playing it, YouTubers were streaming it, which gave the game a lot of promotion, and a lot of people were playing the game because of that. But over time, YouTubers also moved on and got bored of it, and because of that, a lot of people also moved on as well. YouTubers definitely have a huge impact on Roblox games. When they're constantly playing a game and, you know, streaming it and whatever, it actually does help the game probably more than you think, because of that, a lot of people start playing the game themselves, and a lot of people might realize, like, oh, the game looks fun, let me try playing it too. And with that, let's get into our last game being Pooh, which had a lot of potential. The game has over 5 million visits and literally like no one active now. And that's probably one factor already why the game's dead, because people usually like to play with other players and stuff, so if there's no one playing the game, you're not going to play as well. And overall, it had like a pretty big launch and it was really hype up in the community, but then they kind of stopped updating it and they seem to have moved on from the project. The people behind this game is Wonderworks, who are a massive studio with a bunch of massive games, so they probably didn't want to dedicate time, you know, money and people to a project that wasn't doing well. So they probably made a decision to like kind of move on and abandon it, because it was doing well and it was hype, but I guess they couldn't update this game as much as people wanted to and consistently as people wanted to, so everyone moved on, and it seems like the project's not worth their time and stuff right now. And overall, for a number of reasons, Roblox games just die out. There's nothing wrong with that. A lot of these games are super big and had their time in the sun, but people moved on eventually. And overall, if you enjoyed, check out my other dead Roblox game videos, and I'll see you in the next one.